First thing Sergeant Mara Voss knew was the smell of her own blood. It was copper and salt, close and warm, pressed against her cheek by something curved and smooth and utterly wrong. She opened her eyes to darkness, then to a thin amber glow that came from her own wrist. A wide band of dull metal. Its face lit with numerals counting backward from 7 minutes and 41 seconds. She had no memory of how she had come to be here. She had a memory of the road, the dust, the broken white lines of a desert highway, and then a shadow stepping from the shoulder. Then nothing. Now she was inside a tube, circular in cross-section, perhaps 60 centimeters in diameter, smooth-walled. The metal, a color she had no name for. Not silver, not gray. Something between the two with a faint blue-green iridescence under her bracelet's glow. There was no seam she could find, no hinge, no handle. The tube stretched away from her in both directions, curving strips out of sight within 3 meters in each direction. She could not sit up. She could barely turn her head. 7 minutes, 20 seconds. Okay, Mara said, to no one, to herself. Her voice came back flat. The tube absorbed nothing. It simply refused to care. Okay. She had been an EO tech for 6 years before the transfer. She knew small spaces. She knew the particular flavor of fear that lived in them. A high, thin flavor, like biting foil. And she knew what to do with it. In a box, you label the box, you set the box aside and you work. She began to move. Crawling forward was not elegant. Elbows found purchase on the floor of the tube only by scraping, and every push from her boots rang, a dull note through the metal, a sound she felt as much as heard, traveling ahead of her in a way that made the darkness seem to listen. The bracelet threw just enough light to see 2 meters ahead, no more. The amber numerals counted, 6 minutes 3 seconds. She passed a mark on the wall. She almost missed it. She had turned her head to check behind her. Nothing. Just the passage narrowing in her bracelet's light, and the mark caught the edge of her glow. She stopped, pulled herself close. It was not scratched but pressed, as if by a blunt instrument from outside, and it formed a shape she did not recognize. Angular, recursive, a symbol that looked something like a Greek key motif, something like a circuit schematic, something like nothing she had ever been trained on. Below it, smaller, another symbol and another, a row of them, 5 in all, right to left. She stared at them for a full 4 seconds. Then she moved on, because the bracelet said 5 minutes and 41 seconds, and she had no idea what would happen when it hit 0. But she was not interested in finding out. The end of that tube opened into a junction, a small spherical node, barely large enough to turn around in, 3 tubes branching off it. The walls of the sphere were covered in the symbols, dozens of them, dense, layered, almost frenzied, the same angular, recursive geometry, but here arranged in what her eye kept wanting to call a grammar. Some marks larger, some grouped in clusters, some underlined, some circled. She pressed her back against the curve of the sphere and turned slowly, her bracelet lighting patches of wall in sequence like a dim lantern, and she read them the only way she could. As a pattern she didn't understand yet, but whose structure she could feel, the way you feel the architecture of a sentence in a language you've never studied, the way the rhythm tells you where the verb should be, even before you know what the words mean. 4 minutes 15 seconds. She took the left-hand tube. It was a guess. She made it quickly and without apology, because hesitation in small spaces is where people die, and she moved. She found the first body 40 meters in. She smelled it before she saw it. Not rot, not quite, but something like ozone and char, the smell of something that had been briefly and intensely heated. The body was in a recess in the tube wall, a shallow alcove she would have missed in any other light. A woman. Stopped, breathed, looked. The woman was dressed in something similar to what Mara was wearing. A close-fitting suit she didn't remember putting on. And she had the same bracelet on her wrist, but the bracelet was dark. She had Mara's jawline. She had a scar on her left forearm that Mara had gotten from a wire coil at age 14. Mara looked at her own face, looking back at her, slack and still. Her right, she said. Her voice was careful. She had used that voice in the field when she found something she didn't have a protocol for. It was not a frightened voice. It was a voice that was buying time. Right, okay. See. Around the dead woman's wrist alongside the dark bracelet was a bootlace, knotted around it. A flat piece of metal scratched with letters. The scratching was rough, Done with something sharp and hard. Probably a ring or a weld bead. Done in a hurry. Worked the tag free. Tilted it into the light. Voss M. Sergeant E5, your bracelet can trigger the panel's left glyph at each junction safe. The wrong door, and you cook. I didn't figure this out until too late. You might be faster than me. 3 minutes, 8 seconds. She pressed the tag against her palm and moved. She did not know what the bracelet could do exactly, but the body behind her had given her one thing more valuable than a map: a hypothesis. She reached the next junction at a sprint crawl, script her elbows raw, and arrived with 1 minute and 44 seconds on the clock. Passages. She flashed her bracelet at the walls, scanning. The junction was marked like the first. Layers of symbols, the same angular recursion, and she looked for the pattern her dead self had found. The leftmost glyph at the entry of each branch. She had only a second to decide which glyph that was, which was the left-facing one, which was the entry mark, and not a directional addendum. She chose. She moved. Behind her, the tube she'd come from filled with a sound like tearing silk, and then a brief and violent orange. The heat touched the back of her neck. The hair on her arms stood up. Then it was gone. She lay in the new passage, breathing hard, and the bracelet began counting down again from 8 minutes. This is a test, she thought. The thought arrived without drama, not a statement of panic, a statement of mechanics. She had been placed here and given a bracelet, and the bracelet was running a countdown, and somewhere. She was absolutely certain now, with the calm certainty of someone who has too much information and too little. Somewhere there were eyes on her, and they were watching to see what she would do. She wondered if they were surprised. She made herself rest for 30 seconds. She ate 30 seconds the way she used to eat, the waiting time, before a controlled detonation. Deliberately, filling each second with something useful. She inventoried her body, left elbow bleeding, not serious, knee stiffening, where she'd knocked it on a junction wall. No concussion symptoms she could identify. Lungs clear. She pressed the metal tag flat between her palm and the tube floor and tilted it against her bracelet light, rereading what her dead self had left her. Your bracelet can trigger the panels. She looked at the bracelet. It was not a passive device. She'd known that from the first. It was too complex, too deliberate, the numerals too precisely formatted. She turned it on her wrist, feeling for seams, finding one along the inside edge, faint but real. She pressed it. Nothing. She pressed and held. Nothing. She pressed, held, and twisted, and felt a faint vibration against her wrist. Felt something in the bracelet respond like a half-struck tuning fork, and the nearest panel of the tube wall shifted 2 millimeters and stopped. Stared at it. She pressed again. Hold, twist. The panel slid. Behind it was a recess roughly the size of a large book, and in the recess was a tangle of fibrous material that might have been cable, and might have been something biological. She genuinely could not tell. And a small object that was unmistakably a tool, not a human tool. A flat ovoid of the same iridescent metal as the tube, with 3 protrusions arranged in a triangle, but a tool in the way that a hammer is unmistakably a hammer regardless of who built it, because function has a shape. Pry bar, an actuator, something for opening things. All right, Mara said. She pocketed the tool. She was smiling very slightly, in a way she was not fully aware of. It was the smile that had annoyed her instructors, the one that appeared when she understood what something was for, and was already 3 steps ahead of the manual. I see how this works. She began to map the symbols. She had no paper, no stylus. She had the tag from her dead self, and she scratched new marks onto its blank reverse side with the triangle prong tool. 1 mark for each glyph she memorized, a paired notation for its position, and which passage it had been associated with. And after 4 junctions and 4 countdown cycles, she had enough of a sample that she could feel the structure, not understand it. She was under no illusion that she was reading an alien language, but feel its structure. She was a signals technician by secondary specialty. She had spent 2 years working intercept analysis. She knew what recursive, self-similar pattern grammar looked like. She knew how to feel for the decision nodes, the branch markers, the ones that said here, rather than this way. By the 8th junction she was moving with something approaching confidence, which, in a 40-centimeter tube on a countdown, she supposed was as close to comfort as the situation was going to allow. She found the second body at what she estimated was the halfway point. Another version of herself, another dark bracelet, another improvised tag. This one had managed more text, the letters tinier, cramped but legible. The architects watch every junction. They have a hypothesis about us. The hypothesis that we are simple I want to be, the one who proves. Them wrong I kept, going wrong, at the symbol that looks like a fish hook. It isn't a direction marker. It's a warning. It means pressure vent ahead. I never knew what the bracelet's full range was. Maybe you will. If you find the main conduit. Go in, not around. I'm sorry I didn't get farther. The architects, Mara thought, have a hypothesis about us. She lay with her face an inch from the dead woman's face. And she breathed, very slowly. And she thought about that. About what it meant to be tested. About what it meant to be the test subject that the architect hadn't accounted for. About what it meant to be a variable that a model didn't predict. She had a daughter, 3 years old, red-haired, with a tendency to name her food before she ate it. Mara thought about her daughter very specifically, not as an abstraction, not as a reason to survive, but as a person, as a small specific human being who had insisted, 2 weeks ago, that the broccoli florets were named Gerald and Helmut, and that it was rude to eat them without acknowledging them first. She thought about this. And the particular ache of it was not grief and not fear. It was something firmer than either. Something load-bearing. Okay, Helmut, she said softly. Let's go meet the architects. She pressed the bracelet, hold, twist, and the panel beside the second body swung back. And in this recess, there was no tool. There was a larger cavity, and from it came a breath of air that was not recycled tube air. It was alien air. It smelled of something mineral and cold. Something that had no name in any language Mara had ever learned. But it was undeniably, unmistakably outside air. The smell of somewhere. She widened the panel by working the triangle prong tool into the gap and leveraging it open by increments. Each increment rewarded by another breath of the somewhere air. The gap growing from fist width to shoulder width, to the point where she could see light. Real light, ambient, sourceless. The blue-white light of an environment that had never had a sun the right color for human eyes, but had light nonetheless. And she pressed through. She emerged into a space, not a room. The word room implied human design, walls at right angles, a ceiling at a height that acknowledged the upright human body. This was a space in the way that the inside of a rib cage is a space, bounded by curving struts of the same iridescent material as the tubes, vaulted, warm with the blue-white light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Large enough that she could stand. Large enough that she could walk. Large enough that her voice, when she tested it, came back with a genuine echo. And on the far wall, projected or painted or simply present in the way that something enormous and self-evident is simply present, a window. She walked toward it, and her heart was going fast, and she let it, because you can let your heart do whatever it wants, as long as your hands are steady. The window was not a window. She knew this before she reached it. Because she had been through enough junctions to have learned, in the bone-deep way that only repetition teaches, that this place gave you what you wanted to see in order to see what you did. The window showed a desert sky, pale blue, scudded with high white cloud, the color and quality of a late morning in the American Southwest. The light that she had grown up inside, the light that smelled of sage and dry heat even when it was silent. And she pressed her palm against it, and felt not glass but a slight warmth, a texture that was almost but not quite real, the uncanny finish of something rendered rather than something present. Screen, a simulation, another test. She stood in front of it for a long moment, her palm flat against the projected sky. I see you, she said, not loudly. She said it the way you say a thing that you need to be true before you can act on it. I know you're watching. Nothing answered. Blue desert sky continued to be exactly as blue, and exactly as deserted as a thing designed to make her feel something would be. She turned her back on it. She went to the struts and ran her hands along them, looking for the panels, looking for the logic she had been learning for the past. She didn't know how long. 3 hours. 4. Enough that the scratches on her arms had dried, and her knees had settled into a dull, steady ache that she had filed and set aside. She found a panel, leveraged it, found a conduit behind it. Wide, a full meter in diameter, running vertically both up and down. The somewhere air came from below, her dead self had said, "Go in, not around." She dropped into the conduit feet first and fell 12 meters before catching a lip with the triangle prong tool and swinging herself into a horizontal branch, gasping, her shoulders screaming, her hands white on the tool. Below her, the conduit continued into darkness that was not empty. She could feel it, the quality of a large space below, the acoustic character of height and distance. She moved laterally. The branch fed into a gallery. She understood the word, later, with a kind of grim humor, gallery. But in the moment she entered it through a pressure panel that opened onto a catwalk with ledge, the only word she had was enormous. The gallery ran in both directions beyond the range of any light she could generate, its ceiling lost in the blue-white ambient glow, its floor 40 meters below, occupied by shapes she could not resolve at this distance. And along the far wall, behind a curving barrier of something transparent and non-reflective, were the architects. She counted 9 of them. Later she would not be sure of the count. They were not looking at her. Looking at displays she could not see. Their attention distributed, their postures. She searched for the word, administrative. This was not the posture of scientists at an experiment. This was the posture of people managing a process. The slightly hunched focus, the occasional lean toward a neighbor, the small gestures of professional communication. She had sat in operation centers, and she knew what organized attention looked like. And this was it. She was not an anomaly to them, not yet. She was a data point, currently outputting. She observed them for 30 seconds. They were tall, longer in the torso than the leg, with 4 upper limbs where she had 2, the lower pair folded against the abdomen in a resting configuration. Their heads were roughly ovoid, large in proportion to the body, with no visible face on the side turned toward her. But this was the back of the head, or what passed for it, and she made herself note that she did not know what they looked like. She did not know what they wanted. She did not know what their hypothesis was, exactly. Only that it was about her, and that it had so far been confirmed, because she had been doing exactly what the maze had been designed to extract from her. Survival behavior, problem-solving behavior, the specific signature of a human working through a threat with the tools at hand. She had been performing for them. The thought was not self-recriminating. She had done what she had to do, and she had done it well, and the note from her previous self had been right. She had figured things out faster, used the bracelet better, navigated more efficiently. She had been an excellent test subject. She had been so excellent a test subject that she had arrived at the gallery ahead of whatever the architects expected, because one of them, the one closest to the barrier, had made an abrupt motion toward a surface and then stopped, as though it had intended to do something and reconsidered, as though her arrival here now in this condition was slightly ahead of schedule. She filed that. She looked down at her wrist. The bracelet was at 6 minutes and change. Behind her, the pressure panel she'd come through had already sealed. Below her, 40 meters down, the shapes on the gallery floor were tubes. Hundreds of them, the entry points of the maze system, each one with a dim amber glow. Occupied. Every one of them occupied. She thought, this is not just a test, this is a program. This is running continuously, has been running continuously, is running on a scale she could not have imagined from inside a 60-centimeter tube. She thought about the dog tags, her own dog tags, plural, the women who had come before her, who had gotten farther each time, who had been feeding the architect's data with every death and every small discovery, who had, in the aggregate, across however many iterations, built the manual that the latest version of her was now holding. She thought, how many? The question had an edge, not a blade. She was not carrying anything as clean as anger yet, but a shape. The shape of something that needed to be said to the face of whoever made the decision. She had met people like that in her career. The planners, the architects of operations, the ones who moved assets on a table and called the results data. She had generally found it useful to be in the room with them afterward. To make the accounting specific, not as punishment, as orientation. They understood what the numbers meant in human units, in face units, in the unit of the thing you keep in the box and carry with you, and do not look at directly while you are working. She thought about Helmut and Gerald, the named broccoli, the Red-haired girl who had not yet learned to be afraid of anything large, she thought. They have a hypothesis about us. She pressed the bracelet and held it, twist, hold, but she did not let go. She kept the pressure on. The bracelet vibrated harder, climbing through frequencies, and from somewhere behind the transparent barrier, one of the architects turned, finally, and looked at her. Its face, its front, was different from what she had imagined. No eyes she could see, a cluster of sensory structures she could not name, an orientation that was not menacing and not friendly, and was instead something she had no framework for, something utterly calibrated, utterly attentive. Looking at her, she said, clearly, for whatever recording was running, for the architects, and for the dead selves stacked in their alcoves, and for a red-haired girl 3 light years away, who was currently either eating or naming her food. I'm not doing this anymore. She released the bracelet, and it went dark. The countdown stopped. The ambient light shifted. A perceptible change. A color temperature dropped toward something cooler, something that in a human context would have meant alerted, and all 9 architects turned. All of them, not one at a time but simultaneously, a synchronized pivot of 9 large heads, 9 clusters of sensory organs fixing on the one human standing on a catwalk ledge with a dead bracelet and a stolen tool, and a face that was doing something their models had logged 0 times in the record. She was not afraid. That was the thing. She had been afraid, in the tubes, the high, thin, full flavor of it, and she had put it in its box and done her work, and now, standing in the open for the first time in hours, facing the architects across 40 meters of gallery air, she was something that was not afraid. She pointed the triangle-pronged tool at the transparent barrier. She looked for the panel logic she had learned to find. The barrier was a different material, but the principles she'd extracted from the tube system were structural, not material-specific. Function has a shape regardless of what it's made of, and she found the seam. One of the architects moved, not toward a control surface, toward the barrier. It placed what she decided were its hands, the upper pair, the working pair, against the barrier from the other side, to stop her, not a threat gesture. A gesture she had a same for, attention, acknowledgement. It was watching her with everything it had. She thought, you thought you knew what we were. In a tube, and you timed us, and you measured the outputs, and you built a model, and the model was probably good. Probably predicted most of what she'd done up to this point, because she was a human. And humans in survival situations were legible to anyone patient enough to watch. The model knew that she would solve the glyphs. Knew that she would use the tool, would find the conduit, would reach the gallery. The model predicted she would keep going, because that was what the model said humans did. The model did not predict that she would stop. The model did not predict that she would turn to face the architects and simply, flatly, with no drama whatsoever, decline to continue. She pressed the panel. The barrier shifted 2 millimeters, then 5, then enough. She felt the resistance in it. Not a locked resistance, but a weighted one, like a door that has never been opened from the inside. And she put her shoulder into it and it gave, and she stepped through into the space between the catwalk and the barrier, into the dead air that existed between the tube system and whatever the architects occupied, and she stood in that space for a breath, long enough to let them register the fact of her. Then she walked through. The gallery was very quiet. The architects did not move, except for the one at the barrier, who turned to track her, and whose posture had changed in a way she could not name, except that it no longer looked administrative. It looked. She searched for the word for a long moment, walking slowly, the tool held loosely at her side, not as a weapon but as what it was. The way it looked was careful. As if something in its model had been updated, and the new version was still running its first check. She stopped 4 meters from it. Close, it was large. 2.5 meters, maybe more. And the sensory cluster on its face was doing something active, an orientation and reorientation, taking her in from multiple angles the way you take in something you have never seen before, something that has no category in your existing taxonomy, something that requires a new entry. She could see the surface texture of its outer integument now. Not skin, not armor, something intermediate, a matte material that shifted slightly in response to whatever it was feeling, a micro change in surface tension, like the way your face changes before you speak. She watched. She thought, you are not a machine. You are something that has preferences and discomforts, and responses that aren't programmed. You have something like an inner life. You are the kind of thing that can be surprised. Good, she thought. That matters. My name is Mara Voss, she said. She said it the way she had introduced herself at every investigation, every coordination briefing, every handoff to a unit she'd never worked with before. Clearly, without apology, with the implicit message that the name was a fact and facts were the foundation of any useful interaction. I'm a sergeant in the United States Army. I have a daughter. I named her after my grandmother. I would like to go home. She paused. I'm not leaving until you answer me one question. The architect made a sound. She could not tell if it was communication or biology. A vibration, low and complex, felt more in the chest than heard. But it was a response. Something had responded. How many of us did you run through that tube? She said. Before you decided the data was good enough. The gallery was very quiet. She was not angry. It was important. She was not performing anger, not leveraging it, not using it as a frame to project something she wanted the architects to see. She was genuinely, specifically, quietly asking. The way you ask the person who's designed the detonator how long they thought the component had before failure. Not rage. Accountability. The specific human gesture of standing in front of the people who make the decisions and asking them to hold the weight of what those decisions have cost. The architect, with its hands against the nothing barrier, moved. It turned and made a gesture to the others, and 3 of them went to their surfaces, and something in the room changed. Not the light this time, but the air, the pressure, a subtle equalization, and then there was a voice. A human voice recorded, not live. A woman's voice, speaking French, and Mara did not speak French, but the architects had evidently anticipated this, because beneath the French voice, coming from a different source, slightly offset, the way a translation track runs behind the original in a documentary, there were tones, and beneath the tones were images, projected flat onto the floor of the gallery between Mara and the barrier. Photographs, or something like photographs, sequences of imagery that told a story the way images always tell stories, when the person who arranged them wants you to understand something, but doesn't want you to feel they are lecturing you. A woman standing in a tube junction, a woman holding a makeshift tag, a woman pressing her palm against a false window, face tilted up, eyes closed, a woman walking through a barrier, a woman in a gallery, smaller than the architecture, larger than the architects expected, the same woman. Not Mara. Older, different bone structure. The same set to the jaw that Mara recognized as the jaw set of someone who has run the calculation and is now executing on it. The expression that is not brave because it is not performing bravery, it simply is. The voice said, they did not know we could. They built a model from what they could measure. They did not know there were things we do that are not measurable. The voice continued, and the images continued, and Mara watched both, and found that she could follow more than she had expected. The tone of the French carried meaning even without the words, the rhythm of it, the pauses, the places where the voice dropped into something that was not argument, but something quieter and more final than argument. The voice said, and here Mara was interpreting, was filling the gaps with what the images and the rhythm together implied. The voice said, we are not what you studied. You studied our survival. You did not study our grief and our humor and the particular stubbornness that comes from having something worth going back to. And those are not separate things. Those are the same thing. And you cannot understand what we are under pressure without understanding what we hold on to when the pressure is on. The voice said, I am leaving this for the next one. I don't know who she is. I know she exists. We have always left notes. Mara listened to the voice until it ended, and for a moment after it ended, she stood still, and the gallery was as quiet as anything she had ever stood inside. Then she looked up at the 9 architects, and the 9 architects looked back at her, and for a long moment, no one did anything, which was itself remarkable, which was itself something she would describe later as the most purely human beat in the whole of it. The moment where neither side knew what came next, and both sides waited. And the waiting was not standoff, but threshold. The threshold between what the model said should happen and what was actually happening. One of the architects moved to a surface and touched it, and in the floor of the gallery, a panel arose open, and beyond it was light, projected light, not simulated light. The light that falls on alien grass, on soil that has never been walked on by a human foot, on an atmosphere that has exactly enough oxygen mixed with other things that it simply barely works for human lungs. A whole planet's light falling upward into a room, into a woman's face, into the specific, particular, irreducible expression of someone who had been in a tube for a long time and was now standing in a doorway. Psst, she breathed. The air had a color to it. Not literally, but the way very cold air in high mountains has a quality that is almost blue, a cleanness that registers as a specific sensation in the back of the throat and the sinuses. This was that feeling, but inverted, not cold but saturated, rich with compounds she couldn't name that nonetheless hit her chest as clean. Body understood this air before her mind finished the sentence. She took a deeper breath. Another. The grass, if it was grass, was the color of old pewter, flat blades catching the ambient light and throwing it back in thin silver lines. The sky was a color she had no name for, between violet and gray, lit from within by a sun that was lower, redder, broader than the one she'd grown up under. And it painted everything in a warm, copper tone that made the silver grass look like something from a photograph taken with the exposure just slightly wrong. Beautiful in the way wrong things are sometimes beautiful. Behind her, one of the architects had come to stand at the edge of the open panel, not stepping out, standing at the threshold as she had stood at her own threshold. And she turned to look at it, and it looked at her. And the distance between them was the distance of genuinely not knowing what the other was thinking, but being willing to stay in the room while finding out. She held up the triangle prong tool. The architect made a sound, the low chest vibration, and she set the tool down on the lip of the panel, carefully, not throwing it down, setting it down the way you return a borrowed thing. The architect watched her do this. Its surface texture shifted again, the micro change, and she thought, I don't know if that means anything I can read. It's a response, and a response is a beginning. She stepped out onto the alien soil. The ground gave slightly underfoot. Not soft but yielding, as though its top layer had a different compliance than what lay beneath. She took 3 steps away from the structure, which she could see now from the outside. A low, rounded form, dark, half buried in the silver grass. The kind of structure that would be invisible from any altitude, designed to be found from the inside out. And she stopped and turned around. The architect was still at the threshold. 2 of the others had come to stand beside it. They were looking at her the way she imagined they had looked at every human who had arrived in the gallery and found the barrier and stepped through. Except none of the others had gotten this far. None of the others had been outside the structure, under the copper-lit sky, standing on the silver grass. She was the first. The thought arrived without fanfare. She was the latest in a long line. The line her dead selves had built, note by careful note, tag by tag, each one getting closer. And she was the one who had gotten to the end. Not because she was better, because she had more notes. She thought about the woman who had made the recording, the French voice. She did not know her name. She knew her voice, the cadence of it, the particular steadiness of someone who has moved through fear to something on the other side of it. She thought, I will find to tell someone your name. The accounting I asked for includes you. It includes all of us. It includes the women in the alcoves with the dark bracelets, the ones who didn't make it far enough to leave a note, the ones who ran the maze alone in the dark before any of us had figured out that the bracelet could open the panels. She turned her face up toward the low copper sun. The light was warm on her skin. She noticed that she was cataloging the alien world and permitted herself, very briefly, the acknowledgement that it was remarkable, that it was the kind of remarkable that deserved a second. She gave it a second. Then she walked back. Not because she had given up on the accounting, not because she had decided to stop asking, but because you do not conduct a negotiation from 40 meters away when the other party is standing in the doorway. Go back in, you do the work. She stopped at the threshold and looked at the architect who had stood there the longest. I want to talk, she said. I know you don't have my language. I think you have pieces of it. You played that recording. You set it up to reach me, which means you anticipated my arrival and prepared something, which means you are capable of preparation and intention and communication. So we start there. We work with what we have. The architect's surface texture shifted, the low vibration again, and then, unexpected, unmistakable, a second sound from one of the others behind it. Shorter, pitched differently, and then both of them at once. And she stood in the doorway of an alien structure on a copper-lit planet, and she listened to aliens communicating with each other, and she could not understand a word of it, and she thought, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Not because it was comfortable. Not because she knew how it was going to resolve. Because she had arrived here by finding notes her dead selves left her, and she was going to leave notes of her own, and whoever came next was going to have her notes too. We leave notes. That was the thing. That was the specifically, stubbornly human thing that the architect's model had not predicted. We do not just survive. Teach. She stepped back inside. Behind her the gallery hummed softly. The architects remained at their surfaces, watching. Their hypothesis had been updated. The update was still running, and in the silver grass outside, beneath a copper sun, the first human footprints on an alien world pressed quietly into the soil and held their shape in the windless afternoon, as small and specific and permanent as anything that has ever been left behind.